When you're scrolling through a sea of budget gaming laptops, the temptation to grab the cheapest model that promises good enough performance is real. Too often, those cheap alternatives look great on paper, but after a few hours of play the heat spikes, the frame rate drops, and you're left wondering if you've just wasted money on a glorified netbook. The question I keep hearing from friends who are on the fence is there a mid-range option that actually delivers a consistent experience without forcing you into the $3,000 plus flagship tier? That's why I dug into the Razer Blade 14 and tested it in the kind of everyday scenarios most gamers face. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the Blade 14 isn't trying to be a budget machine, but it also isn't the most expensive ultra-premium laptop you'll find. It sits in that sweet spot where you're paying for serious hardware, an AMD Ryzen 9 6900HX and an RTX 3070 Ti, while staying within a price range that a serious hobbyist could justify. The real test, though, is how that power translates when you're not glued to a desk. I took the laptop to a coffee shop, a cramped dorm room, and even on a train, just to see if the performance holds up when you're dealing with real-world Wi-Fi, limited power outlets, and variable lighting. One of the first things you notice is the 14-inch QHD screen with a 165 Hz refresh rate. In a cramped space, the higher pixel density makes the game world feel sharper without forcing you to tilt your head like you would on a 17-inch panel. I tried Shadow of the Tomb Raider on ultra settings, and the laptop consistently hovered around 7,075 frames per second. That's comfortably above the 60 frames per second threshold most gamers consider smooth, and the 165 Hz panel means the motion feels buttery even when the frame count dips a little during intense explosions. For competitive titles like Valorant, the display's low input lag and fast refresh made the aiming feel responsive, something you'd typically expect from a desktop monitor rather than a portable device. The cooling system is another area where the Blade 14 distinguishes itself from cheaper competitors that often rely on thin metal fins and a single fan. Razer's next-gen vapor chamber spreads heat across a larger surface, and on a hot summer afternoon the laptop's temperature stayed in the low 80 SF while running a 30-minute stress test in Cyberpunk 2077. In practice, that meant I could game for an hour on a train without the fan screaming or the chassis becoming uncomfortable to hold. The downside is that the vapor chamber adds a bit of thickness, so the laptop isn't as slim as some ultra-thin 13-inch models, but it's still comfortably portable for a 14-inch machine. Battery life is a point that many buyers overlook until they're halfway through a gaming session and the charger disappears. The Blade 14's 76Wh battery, paired with the efficiency of the Ryzen 9, gives you roughly 3 hours of mixed-use gaming for an hour, then streaming or browsing for the rest. It's not a marathon battery, but it's a noticeable improvement over the subpar numbers you see on cheaper laptops that cut corners on power delivery. If you plan to game while plugged in most of the time, the battery becomes a safety net rather than a primary power source. Now, who should actually consider buying this laptop? If you're a gamer who travels a lot, whether it's a student moving between dorms, a digital nomad hopping between co-working spaces, or a professional who needs to demo games on the go, the Blade 14 offers a compelling blend of performance and portability. The 1TB PCIe SSD also means you can store a decent library of AAA titles without constantly juggling external drives. The DDR5 4800 MHz memory ensures that modern games load quickly and that multitasking, like having Discord, a streaming app, and a game running simultaneously, doesn't cause noticeable slowdowns. And because the chassis is machined aluminum, you get a premium feel that can survive the occasional bump in a backpack. On the other hand, if you're a hardcore sport athlete who lives for ultra-high refresh rates and sub-30 ms input lag, you might still find a purpose-built 15-inch laptop with a 240 Hz panel more aligned with your needs. Likewise, if your budget maxes out at the $1,500 range, you'll probably have to settle for a lower-tier GPU, which defeats the purpose of buying a Blade 14 in the first place. The price point sits around $2,300, and while you're paying for the premium brand, the RTX 3070 Ti isn't a future-proof card for games that will demand RTX 4090 level performance a few years from now. If you're okay with upgrading in a couple of years, the Blade 14 is a solid intermediate step. If you need a machine that will stay at the top of the performance curve for 5 years, you might need to look higher. Practical strengths show up when you start using the laptop for more than just gaming. The built-in Wi-Fi 6E and Bluetooth 5.2 give a stable connection for